is Liz Bramlett coming from our training center, and today we're going to spend a few minutes talking about rents and income limits at Section 8 and Section 236 projects that have been or are going to be refinanced using low-income housing tax credits. It's an important discussion for developers who are planning to refinance multifamily projects, so you can properly project what rent you're going to be able to charge after you refinance. And for property management, this is very important because as you operate these projects, you want to make sure you know what are the correct income limits to use at these blended projects and how much rent can you charge the tenants who have qualified for the HUD multifamily program and the low-income housing tax credit program. The owners using equity raised through the sale of low-income housing tax credits to recapitalize, to renovate, to refinance all kinds of HUD multifamily projects. So there's tax credits, and in some cases the tax-exempt bond program to refinance Section 236 projects, Section 202 projects, 221D3 Beamer projects, and all kinds of projects with all kinds of original financing that have project-based Section 8 contracts. Most properties, when they convert over to tax credits, are going to be acquisition rehab tax credit projects. That means that the ownership is going to have an allocation of acquisition credits to help them raise equity to finance the acquisition of the project, and then a second set of credits to help them finance the rehab of the same project. So for tax credit purposes, these will be called acquisition rehab tax credit projects. And you want to make sure, separate from what we're talking about in this particular session, you want to make sure you know when it is you need to be certifying your existing residents so that their units start producing tax credits, so you get the credit delivery schedule for your tax credit investor. Into all those basic rehab issues, there's some other issues, some other topics that are important and that we want to make sure we understand thoroughly at these multifamily projects. First, despite all the rumors to the contrary out there in the industry, residents do not grandfather into the tax credit program. So that means the owner must complete an initial certification for every resident whose unit they want to produce a tax credit. The resident must be qualified using the applicable tax credit income limit for the household size for their unit to produce a tax credit. So the fact that they already qualified for project-based Section 8, or that they've already qualified for the Section 236 program, in a way guarantees that they will qualify for the tax credit program. So you have to do complete initial certifications, and just like every other tax credit project out there, you have to be able to demonstrate to both your tax credit investor and to your state housing finance agency and the IRS that the tenants you say their unit are producing tax credits, that the tenants have qualified, that you have qualified them for the tax credit program. A resident with income that exceeds the tax credit income limit just doesn't qualify for the program, and their unit, as long as they're in it, will not produce a tax credit. And these HUD-assisted residents are protected from involuntary displacement. So if you're planning on refinancing one of these projects, you don't automatically assume that you can just put people out and occupy your units with people who do tax credit qualify. On January 12th of 2015, HUD issued a memo reminding owners that existing residents at HUD-assisted projects cannot be evicted or asked to vacate their units because they do not qualify for the tax credit program. In the memo, HUD states the owner may only terminate tenancy in limited circumstances as prescribed by HUD regulations and the lease and follow HUD and state and local procedures. terms for reasons other than those permitted by HUD are prohibited. The lease agreement details the grounds for termination of tenancy, which not include failure to meet credit requirements, including tax credit-specific income and student eligibility rules. What they're saying here is just because somebody is over the tax credit income limit or just because they don't comply under the tax credit student rule does not give you the right to ask to put them out of their unit. They are protected from involuntary displacement. And they talk about the lease here. They're talking about the HUD model lease. You'll find those for different types of the HUD multifamily projects in the handbook that covers all the occupancy policies for these projects. That's handbook 4350.3. Now, as a HUD-assisted resident who is not tax credit eligible occupies a unit, again, their unit just won't produce tax credit. And in their memo, HUD did say that the owner may incentivize an ineligible resident to move by coming to a mutually agreed upon arrangement where the owner pays the resident to move, but not be under duress. There can be no harassment. The resident needs to understand that this is a voluntary situation, that if the owner and the resident come to an agreement where they'll move out on a certain date in exchange for some sort of incentive provided by the owner, that is the resident's choice, but they cannot be forced into it. Owners elect to complete each resident's independent income certification for tax credit purposes at the same time as they are completing their HUD annual recertification for that year. That's not the end of the world. The sun will come up tomorrow if you do that. But what you need to understand is that there are rules about when you should complete an initial tenant income certification on your existing residence so that they can start producing a tax credit for you when it is most advantageous for you and your tax credit investor. Because you want them to start producing a credit stream for your investor that is as valuable as possible, so they will put the maximum amount of equity into your project. So you want to make sure that you understand those rules about when you should qualify your existing residents. To income limits. First, let's talk about project-based Section 8. It had an original housing assistance payment contract at the project, and it was effective prior to 10/1/81. Refers to that as the pre-81 universe. Eligibility is determined using HUD's low income limit, which is calculated at 80% of the area median income. If the original HAP contract was effective October 1/81 or later, then was in what we call the post-81 universe, and eligibility is determined using HUD's very low income limit, calculated at 50% of the area median income. Back in 2009, HUD began to stop holding their Section 8 income limits harmless, which is they stop preventing them from going down. So now possible for a project's Section 8 income limits to go down, all Section 8 projects. That's now a possibility. But in a tax credit program, once we start using a set of tax credit income limits for tax credit purposes, we're able to hold our income limits harmless at a project level. So the owner can hold their tax credit income limits harmless, cannot do the same for their Section 8 income limits. So it's possible for, say, if you're using 50% of the AMI for both tax credit and Section 8 purposes at the same project, it could be that 50% of the AMI for tax credit purposes is different than 50% of the AMI for HUD purposes. And I know it's a strange space to be in. That is where we are when it comes to these income limits. When you qualify an applicant, a new applicant, for a blended tax credit Section 8 unit, you compare their gross annual income to the lesser of their Section 8 or tax credit income limit to make sure they qualify for both programs. When it comes to rents for your Section 8 tax credit tenants, a tax credit tenant who receives Section 8, the rules for the Section 8 program govern their rent. It means that once you've qualified them for tax credit purposes, they're income eligible and they comply under the tax credit student rule. Then that means that the total rent the owner receives for the unit is determined by any Section 8 increases they are able to receive for the project, and a portion of that rent paid by the resident is calculated using the tenant rent and TTP formulas required for the project-based Section 8 program. The owner may receive, this is important, the owner may receive a total rent that is more than the tax credit rent. So sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the Section 8 overhang. When you have a tax credit project that has a project-based Section 8 contract and those Section 8 rents are higher than tax credit rents, you can get those higher Section 8 rents, and the difference between Section 8 rents and the tax credit rents are referred to as the Section 8 overhang, and that can often be a big difference, a big deal in you being able to make your projects work. On the development side, paying them and operating them for property management, because that extra revenue can have a really big impact on whether or not the project can work out and be truly financially viable. So the rent that you can collect for the unit is set by the Section 8 program. It may exceed the tax credit rent, and the residence portion may also exceed the tax maximum rent, so long as you receive a rental subsidy payment on their behalf. What they pay, what the tenant pays out of pocket, is governed by the rules, the tenant rent and TTP rules for the project-based Section 8 program. So run the numbers based on Section 8, and they can pay more than the tax credit rent. You charge them that. But remember, if they go off of Section 8 for any reason whatsoever, drop their rent down to no more than maximum tax credit rent. Otherwise, you'll be out of compliance and you'll lose the credits on that unit for the year. Taking public housing projects and converting them to project-based Section 8. And the same thing for rapid rent supplement projects, and they're doing this in the Rad Program, through the Rad Program. So let's say, for example, they're taking a public housing project, taking it through a Rad conversion, and converting to project-based rental assistance. At conversion, they change public housing projects to properties with project-based Section 8, and they've chosen to convert over to what Rad refers to as PBRA. And the projects are governed by all 9 chapters of 4350.3 handbook. And then there are some additional rules you have to be concerned with for Rad projects. Like other properties where you later project-based Section 8 contracts are requiring that these projects that are converting to Section 8 through Rad, that they use an income limit of 80% of the AMI. So these are definitely originally signed in the post-81 universe. These owners are told they use 80% of the AMI to qualify folks for Section 8. And HUD also grandfathers all the existing residents at the time of conversion into the Section 8 program, whether or not they qualify. So if some public housing tenants whose income is now over 80% of the AMI, when they convert through Rad to project-based Section 8, the rules and the numbers run so that they can qualify for a HAP payment, then they qualify, then they can benefit from everything in the Section 8 program. And so they grandfather into the Section 8 program when they go through Rad conversion. Keep in mind, they do not grandfather into the tax credit program. And a very strong, everything you read that comes out about Rad, HUD prohibits any involuntary displacement as a result of a Rad conversion. Very important. Nobody is grandfathered into the tax credit program. And remember that the highest possible tax credit income limit is 60% of the AMI. So definitely possible to have residents at these projects going through Rad conversions who will not tax credit qualify. The public housing income limit that these people originally qualified was 8% of the AMI. So you certainly have housing tenants, they convert over to PBRA Section 8 who do not tax credit qualify. Either they could be over the income limit or maybe they're not in compliance with the tax credit student rule. Applicant for these projects, somebody new after conversion that you move in, does need to qualify for the Section 8 program. They're not grandfathered in because they weren't in there at conversion. So an applicant will need to qualify at the lesser of the Section 8 or the tax credit income limit or a unit where they need to qualify for both programs. And that might not be every unit. These projects are not automatically going to be 100% Section 8 or 100% tax credit. So you have some Section 8 units, and you could have some tax credit units, and you could have some blended Section 8 tax credit units. And you need to map your project to know which unit falls into what category. And a question that I raise all the time that I've yet to get an answer to is, for blended units, you're not going to rent to anybody above 60% of the AMI because you need them to tax credit qualify. So even though the HAP contract says that they can qualify up to 80% of the AMI, you don't take anybody above 60% of the AMI for the blended units. So it's a violation of that HAP contract not rent to applicants between 60 and 80% of the AMI. About Rad projects, I've asked this about just traditional Section 8 projects that are refinanced using tax credits, completely separate from Rad. And I'm afraid I've never been able to receive an answer to that question. Now, Section 236 projects being financed with low-income housing tax credits. The 236 program is not a rental subsidy program. It's a mortgage subsidy program. It's a program through which the feds provide FHA mortgage insurance for a project, and in addition to insuring the mortgage, they made a second mortgage payment on behalf of the owner, and that second mortgage payment made by the feds was referred to as the interest reduction payment, and reduced the interest that the owner had to pay on their mortgage from something like 6% to 1%, making it easier for the owner to operate at affordable rents. Now, of these projects over the last 10 years or so have gone through the decoupling process, which allows an owner to refinance their original mortgage, but the feds continue to make the interest reduction payment on behalf of the project if that was part of a plan that kept the project in the affordable housing inventory. Compliance is the same for a decoupled site as for a traditional 236 site. The limit to qualify for the Section 236 program is 80% of the AMI. To find an applicant for Section 236 tax credit unit, you're going to compare their income to the lesser of the applicable income limit for the two programs. For the existing residents, when you go through refinancing and you place the acquisition credits into service, when you qualify those existing residents, you need to qualify them again at their tax credit income limit because they don't grandfather in to the tax credit program. Now, they allocate enhanced housing vouchers to protect any of the low-income existing residents from rent increases and displacement. They're protected from involuntary displacement by the memo that we talked about earlier, but they worry about them being displaced because the rents go up so much they can't afford it, because a lot of these projects need significant rent increases to make them financially viable. So HUD provides them with enhanced vouchers, and they are there exclusively for the existing residents for the identified property, for the project that's going through decoupling, but they're administered by that local public housing agency. So they're not a project-based subsidy. They are a tenant-based rental subsidy. The Public Housing Authority may use the 236 basic rent as a payment standard they use to establish the maximum rent they will subsidize for the unit, and they can do that even if that 236 basic rent is higher than normal payment standard they would use for that unit size. Now, if the tenant moves from the project, it's no longer an enhanced voucher. It becomes a regular housing choice voucher, which is still terrific. They've got a hold of a rental voucher, which is no easy thing to do these days, but because it becomes a regular rental voucher, the payment standard drops to what it normally is for their area for the unit size they qualify for. A two-bedroom basic rent of $900. Usually, the PHA will subsidize a rent for a two-bedroom unit of up to $825, but take it up to $900 to protect this tenant from any big rent increase. Maximum rent owner, if the resident moves from the project, would drop down to $825. So if the tenant decides to move, they take their voucher with them. That's terrific. But they know going forward, the Housing Authority will subsidize the rent for them more than $825. A 236 resident who receives no form of rental assistance, they may not collect more than the tax credit maximum rent if they want the unit to produce a tax credit. Remember that the Section 236 program is not a rental subsidy program. It's an FHA mortgage insurance program. So just because it's a 236 unit does not make it okay for you to collect more than the tax credit rent. So that the owner may charge the resident no more than the lesser of the tax credit maximum rent or the tenant rent that's calculated using the Section 236 tenant rent formulas, which you would find in Chapter 5 of the 3350.3 handbook. Let me know if you have any questions where I might be able to help you with regards to these HUD multifamily projects being refinanced using low-income housing tax credits or your RAD conversions. You can find me through my website. You have here on this final slide my office number and my email address. You can follow me on Twitter, and please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I look forward to talking with you again in the future. Bye-bye.